Hello, today we will be discussing aggregate demand and aggregate supply. The three major components of this economic model is the aggregate demand curve, the short-run aggregate supply curve, and the long-run aggregate supply curve.
The aggregate demand curve is a curve that shows the relationship between price level and quantity of real GDP, or gross domestic product, demanded by households, firms, and the government, holding everything else constant. If any variable besides the price level changes, the aggregate demand curve will shift. Monetary policy are actions the Federal Reserve takes to manage the money supply and interest rates to pursue macroeconomic policy objectives. Lower interest rates shift the aggregate demand curve right as consumption and investment spending increases. Higher interest rates shift the aggregate demand curve left as consumption and investment spending decreases. Fiscal policy are changes in the federal taxes and government purchases to pursue macroeconomic policy objectives. An increase in government spending or a decrease in taxes shifts the aggregate demand curve right. A decrease in government spending or an increase in taxes shifts the aggregate demand curve left.
No, $7.
10.
$10.
I gotta do it. Income taxes are high.
If foreign prices rise, these foreign countries will want to buy more products from a nation whose prices are lower. Therefore, the country whose prices did not rise will have decreased exports and increased imports. If foreign prices fall, these foreign countries will want to buy more products from a nation whose prices are lower. Therefore, the country whose prices did not fall will have increased exports and decreased imports.
Did you hear that Canada's price of computer chips went from $2 to $5?
Are you serious? We can't afford that.
Of course we can't. If we're going to stay in business, we cannot buy from them.
Well, when our contract expires, we'll switch over to them. Hey, you know that computer company that we're getting our copper wires from? Well, they just called this morning and said that they're going to start charging us double for our order.
And how is that compared to their competitors in Canada? I heard it's much, much cheaper over there.
Well, it's about half the price, but are you willing to sacrifice the quality for a cheaper price?
Well, of course. We'll go out of business otherwise.
Okay, so I'll call the Canadian company immediately.
If households are more optimistic about their future income and firms are more optimistic about the future profitability of investment spending, the aggregate demand curve shifts to the right. If households become more pessimistic about their future income and firms become more pessimistic about their future profitability of investment spending, the aggregate demand curve shifts to the left.
I have so much money. Oh yeah. I love being rich. Oh, I think I'm gonna get a raise next month. I'm gonna start buying more things.
The short-run aggregate supply curve is a curve that shows the relationship in the short run between the price level and quantity of real GDP, or gross domestic product, supplied by firms.
What shifts aggregate? Expected changes in the future price level. If workers and firms. What shifts aggregate supply? Expected changes in the future price level. If workers and firms believe the price level is going to rise by a certain percentage, they will adjust their wages and prices by that percentage. The short-run aggregate supply curve will shift by an equal amount if all other variables that affect the short-run aggregate supply curve maintain constant.
In 2014, we are projecting that the price level will increase by 3%. Therefore, we will increase our wages and our prices by 3%.
Increases in the labor force and in the capital stock. A firm will supply more output at every price if it has more workers and more physical capital. The short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right. A decrease in the labor force causes the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift to the left.
In 2013, there was an increase in shares sold. This increase in capital stock will be allocated towards hiring more staff and buying more machinery.
A supply shock is an unexpected event that causes the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift. It is often caused by unexpected increases or decreases in the prices of important natural resources that can cause firms' costs to be different from what they had expected. If the expected price of an important natural resource increases, the cost of producing output rises, and the short-run aggregate supply curve would shift to the left. If the expected price of an important natural resource decreases, the cost of producing output decreases, and the short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. Workers and firms sometimes make inaccurate predictions about the price level and try to compensate for these errors. If workers and firms adjust to the price level being higher than expected, workers and firms adjust to the price level being lower than expected, the short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the right.
Long-run aggregate supply. Defining long-run aggregate supply. In the long run, the ability of an economy to produce goods and services to meet demand is based on the state of production technology and the availability and quality of factor inputs. Long-run aggregate supply is determined by the stock of a country's resources and by the productivity of factor inputs such as labor, land, and capital. Changes in the technology also affect potential real gross domestic product, also known as GDP. The long-run aggregate supply curve is a curve that represents the relationship between the price level and the amount of goods and services produced over the long run. In the long run, only capital, labor, and technology affect the aggregate supply curve of the macroeconomic model. Causes of shifts in the long-run aggregate supply curve. Any change in the economy that alters the natural rate of growth of outputs will cause the curve to shift. Improvements in productivity, efficiency, and increase in the stock of capital and labor resources are causes that shift the long-run aggregate supply curve outwards. Here are 6 policies that are targeted towards increasing the long-run aggregate supply. Expanding the labor supply. Increase the productivity of labor. Improve mobility of labor. Expanding the capital stock. Increase business efficiency. Stimulate invention and innovation.
Sir, which is the quickest route to Cloverdale from Santa Rosa?
Well, why won't this work?
Siri, which is the quickest route from Cloverdale to Santa Rosa?
Getting directions from Cloverdale to Santa Rosa.
Can't wait to watch this movie.
Hello and welcome to China.
Hi, I'm President Jim Doty, and I am passionately in love with economics, macroeconomics.